Welcome to The Week Ahead, a podcast by SBM Intelligence. I'm your host, Veronica Pana Igube. Every Friday, we explore stories that are shaping our continent. The US has lifted restrictions on Nigerian ports, potentially boosting trade, improving port operations, and strengthening economic relations. How could this affect Nigeria's international trade? Foreign investors are raising concerns about Nigeria's capital gains tax, warning that higher or uncertain taxes could affect investment decisions. How can Nigeria attract investment while increasing tax revenue? Algeria is strengthening its ties with AES countries, potentially improving regional cooperation on security and economic issues. What could this mean for stability in the Sahel? Joining us today for further insights on the podcast is Samuel Article. Welcome, Samuel, to the podcast.
Thank you for having me on the podcast.
It's always a pleasure having you. Let's begin with our first story where we're seeing the US lifting restrictions on Nigerian ports. And this can boost trade, improve our operations. But I just want you to give our listeners a backstory. Why were we even having restrictions in the first place? I thought that our relations with the US were strong, seeing that they also had, we saw the cooperation. I mean, after they declared us a country of particular concern, we've seen a keen interest in ensuring security of Nigerians. So I thought, I mean, there's an assumption that Nigeria has a good relationship with the US as well. But then now we're seeing them, they are lifting these restrictions. What's the impact of the restrictions? What led to this, lift of the ban? And how, most importantly, how would this ban affect Nigeria's international trade?
Yeah, I think those are those are complex questions. I think to start with, I think it's important to start with this, yes, that the US did not prohibit Nigeria's exports or they imposed some blanket ban on Nigerian ports. That's not what happened. I think sometimes in June of 2024, the US Coast Guard, they presume and they believe that the security arrangement we have in our ports is not strong enough. Uh, so essentially, if a vessel, for instance, if a ship is saying it's coming from South Africa and is traveling to the US, and then for some reason the ship actually bought in Nigerian ports. When it gets to Nigerian port, maybe it offloads some goods or it picks up some goods before heading to the US. The mere fact that that ship had battered in Nigeria, the assumption is that we had some security lapses. We've not been doing what we should do. And then, so what the Coast Guard had said, and the U.S. Security system responsible for their for this kind of thing, that's the U.S. Coast Guard. They said, oh, this vessel that will be coming to U.S. will require additional security measures, especially, and they will face greater scrutiny, and that comes at a cost, of course. It means essentially that because you're going to face additional security measures, you're going to face greater scrutiny. It means that the time that it will take you to move goods will have to increase and the personnel that will involve. So if you build all those things into cost, it makes one way or the other the shipping costs for any vessel that move through Nigeria to go up astronomically. I think that's what it means essentially. So regardless of whether the ship, for instance, a ship is going from Nigeria, goes to Spain, it France, goes to the US before heading to the United States, as long as Nigeria is part of it, they face that scrutiny. And what that means in essence is that many people will pull back and say, okay, I don't want Nigeria, especially if you are, I mean, if you look closely at Nigeria, we really do not export a lot of things. Yeah, we could look at that and say we don't really, Nigeria is in a very aesthetic state in terms of how many goods we are export, except for maybe for agricultural product that we export. We're not a big exporter of goods. So most shipping companies will say, oh, Nigeria is actually not a good place to go to. And because of that, there are very few that comes to Nigeria. Because there are very few coming to Nigeria, that means that they will charge you more. And that means the cost of shipping goods goes up. So I think that's the most important pillar, the first big cost implication that we can talk about. Yeah, just to put that in context, with the lifting of this restriction, it means that we should get more competition in that space. Of course, it's going to take time for the trickle-down effect to happen, and then that could essentially lower our shipping costs and then improve our vessel movement, make it more faster. I think the second thing we talk about is the fact that Nigerian ports are becoming more competitive. If you look at the ease of doing business, that's one of the issues that boils down on why should I come to Nigeria? Why should I even do business in Nigeria? But with all these things going down, because when one way or the other, the compliance risk is lower in Nigeria, it essentially means that we are becoming more competitive. Our ports are becoming more competitive. And then with that itself, of course, people that do importation or exportation will begin to see some benefits in the long run. The third thing I would say is that whether we like it or not, regardless of the challenges the US had posed, our trade with the US is expanding. I think we are doing about $11.8 billion in trade as at last year. I think we did about $11.8 billion in trade. Um, Whether we like it or not, again, I use the word whether we like it or not because we know there are some conditions that are attached to some of these trades. We know that the present US government, their disposition around trade has not been necessarily favorable to Nigeria, despite the fact that the trade weighs more on the United States side, unlike in the Nigerian side. But that said, um, this is good also in how we expand because many people will look at it, okay, we can import goods, we can export goods from there because ships could stop by the Nigerian port without having additional cost. Of course, there are contexts to that because we still have to do a whole lot of things within our port system. I think more importantly, the maritime security and investment. I remember when the president came on board and then he said he's going to appoint a minister for the blue economy, or what did he call it that time? One of the key things we said, I think, on this podcast then was that there are potentials to begin to address. I mean, even having a direct ministerial oversight over some of these things could help us begin to address some of those challenges that are weighed heavily on the Nigerian maritime system, given the fact that the bureaucratic system that the authorities, the Nigerian maritime authorities, have to contend with over the years, and then how that boils down have not helped many people. I mean, if you go there, people complain all the time. And so having that oversight one way or the other is showing clearly that there's stronger confidence in the maritime security, around maritime security in Nigeria, and then by extension investment. And that's good, meaning that the risk premium that we are paying seems to be going down. I will end by saying that back to your question, you said, how do we find ourselves here? When you have lapses in security, when you don't walk through your workflow, when you have broken workflows, when you allow things to go behind instead of following lay down procedures, when you don't invest in security, you focus your attention on remedy, which is defense, rather than focus your attention on security, preventing crimes from happening. Of course, over time, people will notice that, and then by extension, that will come back to haunt you. And that's what led us to where we are since 2014. Now, I think the signal is important. If you recall, we're beginning to see, I'll call it reliable port infrastructure. I think a little bit of a more transparent charges at the port. I'm not saying we're there. You're seeing faster cargo clearance. I think that's already happening, and you can see that in the number of trade that is going through the port. I think we discussed this some months ago. And then you see that the merchandise trade in Nigeria is going up. In fact, the first quarter of this year, we're doing about 34.8 trillion naira in terms of merchandise trade, which is good. Of course, we know that crude oil and hydrocarbon still takes the majority of these. But that said, we're doing well in terms of at least we are doing better than we were doing before. Again, that again reinforce some of those things that we have always said reforms, when they are tailored, when you are designing reform and you have clear goals and objective, and the reform is directed at ensuring that those goals and objective make life easier for businesses, for people in the country, not just making it cosmetic, definitely the reward will come out. But when your reform is directed at cosmetic things based on ASA, not grounded in any fact, of course, you just run the reform, you turn people and then trap people into poverty and nail them in. And then at the end of the day, we come back and then we still reform the reform and then we continue to go in circles without any meaningful progress. I would say what we are seeing at the ports reform is that it's beginning to yield some positive things. And I think the people responsible should get the praise for that.
I mean, I agree with you that there's a lot of reform that has gone into the port system or the ecosystem as well. And like you said, we're yielding the results right now. Let's move over to our second story, where we're seeing foreign investors raising concerns over Nigeria's capital gains tax. Why is this happening? Why are they having concerns as well? I know the new act came into play earlier this year, January 2026. But now that we're facing this, pushback or kind of complaint from foreign investors, do you think that this is going to have a bad effect in the sense where we see it discourage more investors from coming into the country? But most importantly, how can Nigeria balance its taxes as well as balance um, attracting investors into the country? Because really, foreign direct investment is very, very key. Even, I mean, to contribute to the one we raise inside Nigeria, it's really, really key to also have investors coming to the country. And investors' confidence is something that, signals to other investors to come into the country. So if you're having investors complain and say, oh no, we don't want these taxes, how can we balance it? And why are we having this complaint right now?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of context to this. Historically, the capital gains tax in Nigeria, essentially, if you invest in stock market or you invest in a house or in a landed property or in any asset, any measurable asset, let's assume you put in 10 naira and all of a sudden you sold it for 15 naira. You actually have a gain of 5 naira on it. So historically, there's a tax on that 5 naira that you have made. And the government used to, before now, before the 1st of January 2026, the government used to take 10%. But after the tax reform, it's jacked up to 30%. Meaning that instead of paying one, I mean, for every five, you pay 10% of that. That's how much is that? I can't even quantify that in kobo. It's been jacked up to 30 percent. One
Yeah.
thing I know is that investors are more organized than the people, right? Because again, the nature of work in Nigeria is so fragmented that you have a lot of informal work, making up almost about 80 something percent of the work you have in Nigeria. And then you have informal businesses running around doing businesses. So there are very few sophisticated folks that invest in the stock market that understand some of these tax, and they're always the loudest when it comes to tax reform. In fact, when you go to a room and they are discussing tax, you most likely not see people there. You will most likely see the corporate, the big shiny suit people talking so much about this. And so that's what you're saying here. But that said, to your question on how Nigeria can attract investment, that's the core question here. If we look at it from the mirror of tax, which is very narrow, I think the most important priority for us is to have predictability. It's not that we just begin to throw any type of things into the mix. Oh, I'm going to raise tax today, we do 30% tomorrow, then it's 50%. Because if people cannot, if there are uncertainty itself around what rates will look like, what exemptions will look like, how to actually filing requirements, where implementation makes expected return harder to calculate. That's the core point. Investors typically do not like uncertainty. And so we must ensure that everything we are doing is predictable. That's the first starting point. for anybody to attract any investment. Predictability. People want to see the direction of travel. People want to estimate. They want to sit down on their spreadsheet or whether it's AI nowadays, and then they predict and then they see what potential return they will get from their investment, and then based on that, they can make informed decision. But if you're throwing the mix into and you're changing things and moving the goalposts every now and then, of course, that's uncertainty, and uncertainty is not good. I think that's the first one to mention. The second thing I would say is that foreign venture capital investment, of course, they've always raised this particular concern about how difficult it is to navigate the filing obligations that comes, especially with offshore transactions, and about the uncertainties that also surround how you treat exit of capital. You remember the story of MTN when they wanted to capital out of the country, and then you could recall what that led to. And then a lot of people have faced the same thing. I recall EFCC harassing some people. I think is it Baba Jebu, I think, or something like that. That they say he was taking money out, and then they use EFCC to harass you because in Nigeria we struggle to actually delineate between what criminal offense looks like and what civil offense looks like. So they use everything, they model everything together. The police themselves, they are not helpful. And so investors do not like that. I mean, it's enough to think about it. Yeah, it's easy to bring money into Nigeria, but how will I take the money out? What are the conditions? I need to have that clarity immediately. That's the problem in Nigeria. We don't have that. Again, when you look at the clear regulation around there, and then you look at the guidelines that have been published, it's not consistent. How it protects our revenue, it's not consistent. I mean, I can go on and on and on, but the core thing around taxation is let's have predictability. All these filing obligations that comes with taxation, how do we simplify it? I know Taiwo, the coordinating minister of the economy, has worked around this. He said a lot about this. We hope that it brings some of those things he's said in the past to fusion in how we see our tax reform through. I think that's the first point to make. The second thing to also make is that rates should be considered internationally competitive. We are not living in an island of nobody. We live in a country and they are competitors. So if Nigeria is placing 30% on capital gains tax, the question is that how much are other countries charging? Have we done our competitive analysis? Have we looked closely at what other people are charging? And does that make us better? Are we aligning ourselves with global best practice, or are we becoming an outliner? The truth is that I think we are becoming an outliner. And that doesn't look well, especially within the context of the African market. We want to ensure that people are investing in our country. We have a lot of infrastructure. If I always tell people that as it's where Nigeria today, Nigeria needs to have about 40 new cities that will be bigger than Abuja. We need to begin to rebuild all our infrastructure. We need to tear down those ugly, smelly gutters that we have all around the place that is breeding mosquito, and build cities that is ideal for the people of Nigeria. And to get that done, of course, we need to bring in investment. So the key question is that how do you convince investors to come when they are, I mean, when from now and there, it costs me more. Anytime I make profit, the government is quick to take 30% of that profit away. When other countries, even in more advanced countries, that the risk level is very low, they are not charging that kind of tax. So we need to look at that again and put it side by side, and then put and situate ourselves within where we should be. I mean, ambition is good, but we have to be very considerate. I think the third point I will make is the use of targeted relief rather than the blanket exemptions. I like it. The fact that the government is now use relief system rather than use blanket exemption. So if we are going to exempt you from this tax, before it is uniform, but now it's targeted, and that raised some concerns. I think accountability concerns. I think it also raised some very legitimate concerns. So if I'm close to government, I can get reliefs while my competitor is actually locked out, if you understand what I mean. So if you're doing targeted relief, meaning that me as Atiku, because I'm close to government, I get tax relief, but we are doing the same business, we are doing the same thing under the same condition. And then you go to the same government because you are not close to government, you are forced to pay tax. That's not well, that's not fair. We need to make sure that what we are doing is in the interest of the economy. Again, I will always complain about that. I'm not a big fan of that. We need to ensure that we have divine exemptions. If we have divine exemptions itself, it's also a very good way to attract investors into our country. Again, I'm talking from a narrow standpoint of taxation. Of course, we can always increase compliance by broadening our tax base, ensuring that it's simple to pay, it's easier to pay tax. Those are simple things like a better tax identification number. I have an identity, I have a BVN. I have a BVN, I have this is it INEC ID, I have a passport number, I have NIN. She should not take me much to get a TIN number. And can we even wind the TIN number into some of this identity system? That's the first thing. How do I file tax, especially for business? It should be electronics. It should be a form-based system that is easy to do. I think those are things that will aid tax payment. How do we get information? Where do I go? Which resources do I sort and solicit when I need to pay tax or when I need to think through exemptions? That needs to be there. In terms of enforcement also, this concept of using thugs and touts to collect tax, lock people's business down, oh, they have not paid tax, then you seal the business. Just imagine somebody operating a cold room and then he has a lot of stock of food in there, worth billions of naira. All of a sudden you go there, oh, they have not paid 20 naira tax. Then you see local government, they shut down the place. They kill all the business, they get people sacked. Because again, if the business is no longer there, the people that are earning income, salaries, that pay tax, they are no longer there. We really do not think about some of those things before we make actions. We need to stop all those nonsense that we've been doing. We need to remove this poorly justified exemption system. Again, I don't subscribe to it. I think I always ask this big question around all these tax expenditure issues. If Lagos State benefit from a tax system, because again in Nigeria, the federal government collects money on behalf of the federation. The money itself that the federal government is collecting is not the federal government money. It's the federation money that will be divided across the three arms of government. You share it with the federal, the state will get its own share, and then the local government will share. But the federal government unitarily sometimes will just apply exemptions, tax expenditure, and give it to somebody. So the question is that, oh, because you build a road in